Good morning and welcome to the California Fuel Cell Partnership Fuel Cell Revolution webinar. This is Ben Zong, the California Fuel Cell Partnership. We have Bill Ulrich, Executive Director of the California Fuel Cell Partnership, who will be presenting today. Just a couple of administrative items before we get started. You're all on mute. However, we do encourage you to ask questions using the GoToWebinar question feature. Also, this webinar will be recorded and the presentation will be available after this presentation next week. A link will be emailed to all attendees with a link to, again, a link to where the presentation and the webinar is hosted. And so with that, Bill?
Great, thank you, Ben. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We are excited to share with you our vision for 2030 for California and a sustainable fuel cell vehicle market. For more than a year, California Fuel Cell Partnership members have carefully examined and considered the next steps for hydrogen and fuel cell vehicle commercialization in and even beyond California. This report, which I'm summarizing for you today, is a consensus view of the market in 2030 and the revolution it will take to achieve our vision. First, though, let's review where we are today. Okay, great. Thank you, Ben. In 2012, the Fuel Cell Partnership released our first roadmap that described how to start the commercial market. It called for 100 stations statewide to support the initial market launch for fuel cell vehicles in metropolitan market clusters supported by connectors and destination stations. Earlier this year, Governor Brown unveiled a new executive order with new targets of 200 hydrogen stations by 2025 and 5 million ZEVs by 2030. His proposal also called for more hydrogen infrastructure funding to accelerate market growth. Due in a large part to the California State Legislature, the Air Resources Board, and the Energy Commission, we have successfully launched the market in California. Today, hydrogen and fuel cell vehicles are real retail products. Today, about 5,000 people are driving fuel cell cars in California, more than any other region in the world. They are filling at 35 open retail stations with another 29 stations in development. In addition, California transit agencies are successfully running fleets of fuel cell buses, and the first fuel cell trucks are now hitting the road. These customers are the willing participants to start the market. They adapt to the early technology, knowing it is advancing rapidly. They recognize and accept the environmental benefits of fuel cell vehicles and enjoy the range and refill times similar to their gasoline cars. Like all early adopters, they accept the challenges of today's limited infrastructure in order to encourage the opportunities for the future. CFCP members know that to move to the next stage of the market, the station network has to grow much more quickly. Now our mission is to accelerate the market for fuel cell vehicles and hydrogen. It will require some new approaches and new thinking. So you may be asking yourself, what are we talking about? What is this revolution? It is to transition California's vehicle and fuel market to one powered by clean, renewable resources, while still delivering the same or even improved customer convenience and capability of today's conventional vehicles. Customers are the key to this transition. Our goal is to enable the market conditions that will transition the today's innovators to everyday customers throughout the state, reaching a market tipping point. While today's fuel cell vehicles have a familiar fueling experience and long distance capability, the entire value proposition, including you need me to speak up? Is that the signal you're giving me?
Yes.
Okay. While today's fuel cell vehicles have a familiar fueling experience and long distance capability, the entire value proposition, including vehicle and fuel costs, and a robust statewide network, must enable people from all walks of life, all income levels, and in rural areas and cities to choose ZEBs because they fit their lifestyle and needs. When we can provide this, the future we envision becomes possible. we intend to establish the market conditions which will enable a network of 1,000 hydrogen stations across the state, which will be enough to support up to 1 million fuel cell vehicles. This will achieve the critical mass to enable customer adoption and create a sustainable supply and demand market system for renewable transportation. But why 1,000 stations? It's modeled on the existing market for gasoline. This map shows how gasoline stations and fuel sales are concentrated in California. Blue has fewer stations, and red areas are where the most fuel is sold. Today, we have about 8,000 retail stations statewide, and people know they can get wherever they need to travel. The Air Resources Board has modeled and determined that 1,000 well-placed hydrogen stations will nearly match the availability of the existing gasoline network. This statewide network is crucial to establishing the customer base, which in turn creates market conditions that encourage greater private investment. 1,000 hydrogen stations, enabling 1 million vehicles, reaches a critical mass that allows the market to go mainstream. So what do we need to achieve our vision? We know there's no one answer. Instead, it will take a combination of factors working together. The first action is to enable the market by transitioning the current system of extensive government support to one driven by private investment. Building more stations, large-scale infrastructure, creates economies of scale benefits that reduces the currently high costs for station and fuel. These, along with vehicle costs, need to be at parity with current traditional transportation options. While the current grant funding approach to stimulating station development has proven successful in launching the market, market-driven policies that focus on risk management and cost offsets in these early years are needed to build market confidence and begin the transition to a sustainable supply and demand system. When industry and investment markets see a pathway to a business case, then they can devise their own strategies and approaches for participation in that market. As a result of more market-based policy environment, we will see the benefits: increasing private investment and initial reductions in infrastructure costs, and increases in customer adoption and demand for renewable hydrogen. Industry and investment groups look to market signals to determine when and how to participate in that market. Government market signals, such as policy and funding direction, is one of the most important market signals for a new technology. While the plug-in market has a decade-long head start in this market, similar signals are needed for the hydrogen ZEV option to encourage private investment and market participation along the same level. As we wrote this report, Fuel Cell Partnership members started working on two initiatives that could use more market-based policies to incentivize private investment in hydrogen infrastructure. The first is the Energy Commission working with industry to understand how to leverage the existing Alternative and Renewable Fuels Vehicle and Technology Program, or ARFVTP funding, to support scale development, a discussion that industry is excited to continue. Second, the Air Resources Board is seeking to adjust the Low Carbon Fuel Standard, or LCFS, to accelerate ZEV deployment. Next month's ARB meeting will propose changes that provide additional incentives for ZEV infrastructure that may provide a carrot for private companies to build infrastructure ahead of vehicles and develop even more renewable fuel. The revolution requires creating collaborative thinking that rewards businesses for taking risks while building infrastructure for vehicles that benefit the public with reduced greenhouse gases and improved air quality. Our next strategic pathway towards a self-sustainable system is to fully establish the market through a consumer value proposition that drives customer adoption throughout California. It is essential that fuel cell vehicles are as convenient and attractive as today's cars to win over everyday customers. We need to continue and improve early market incentives for consumers to drive adoption during the early years as the market develops. California has a strong history and experience here, and community-level planning must include more hydrogen and fuel cell considerations, as is currently being done for the plug-in market, to support local adoption. The customer will drive the market change towards sustainability, and supporting their opportunity to choose the fuel cell zero-emission option is critical to all of our long-term success. We also need careful planning to extend the hydrogen station network to allow drivers to travel everywhere in California, to provide more access in disadvantaged communities, and help neighboring states develop stations as well. Currently, hydrogen production is focused on industrial uses, like refining gasoline and making consumer products. Reaching critical mass and mainstream drivers will require a supply of hydrogen dedicated to fuel stations. This means building new production facilities, preferably focused on renewables, and this needs to start quickly to precede the projected demand. Dedicated hydrogen production will enable reduced costs, increase customer adoption, and create more jobs in California through new market opportunities. Yet more than anything, what is needed is to create customer demand. Data from the most recent ARB AB8 report shows the adoption rates for hybrid, plug-in, battery, and fuel cell vehicles. They all start similarly, slowly rolling out and building momentum as more vehicle makes and models and infrastructure, in turn, spurs greater demand. With a vision of 1,000 stations, the fuel cell vehicle adoption rate quickly catches up with and then even surpasses the adoption of battery vehicles. Two reasons are that each fuel cell vehicle provides a no-compromise, zero-emission value to the customer, and that one hydrogen station can support hundreds of cars a day. Without strong customer support for vehicles and infrastructure, this half of the ZEV future may not fully materialize. Stimulating network station development will inspire widespread consumer adoption. Finally, we need to expand and amplify the market for fuel cells and hydrogen by spreading the technology across transportation applications and energy systems. Because the components of fuel cells are common across platforms, from a car to a truck to an ocean-going ship, expanding the use of fuel cells in other applications help amplify innovations and reduce costs. It capitalizes on economies of scale and scope, and it will also build greater demand and encourage even greater private investment as the market grows. The fuel cell truck and bus market has already started, and building the infrastructure now for medium and heavy-duty vehicles is vital for that success. In the same vein, hydrogen coupled with electricity in the grid can provide grid balancing support, larger long-term storage, and increase renewable production. Hydrogen can even transform markets and applications not reachable by renewable electricity alone. Hydrogen can play a significant role in addressing some of the challenges in our overall energy system. Renewable energy, more stable operation of traditional power plants, and greater flexibility for the entire energy system. We've already begun working with utilities and the CPUC to understand the role hydrogen can play in renewable energy and system efficiency improvements, which also creates new revenue streams for hydrogen producers. In return, this can lead to faster renewable energy adoption and deeper emissions reductions in the overall energy supply. It can also lower renewable hydrogen prices compared with traditional production methods, provided these values are fully recognized within the energy system. Most of us are well aware of the benefits of fuel cell and hydrogen, but I want to paint the specific benefits of 1,000 stations and 1 million vehicles. A sustainable market will bring new businesses and employment opportunities to California. Building stations and hydrogen production creates new jobs, and we expect to see even more technical innovations that spur more startups and create new divisions in existing companies. This has been evidenced by the growing interest and participation in the state's hydrogen station funding solicitation and the formation of the Hydrogen Council, a global effort of dozens of multinational companies working together to recognize the hydrogen economy potential. Increasing numbers of companies are seeking to capitalize on this growing global green transportation and energy economy that California is helping create. The 1,000 hydrogen station network target is broad enough that 97% of California's disadvantaged communities and 94% of all Californians are covered by a station where people can fill an affordable car with hydrogen in just a few minutes, and where hydrogen is equal to or less than the cost of gasoline. 1 million hydrogen cars at today's efficiency and today's mix of hydrogen saves nearly 700 million gallons of gas, avoids nearly 3 million tons of GHG, and 4,000 tons of NOx emissions. Imagine, with the rapid development of new technology, new innovation, and more renewable hydrogen in 2030, these numbers will be even more significant. And how will we advance this movement? California Fuel Cell Partnership members started on these actions while still working on this vision. Our immediate next steps are to continue collaborating and working together on implementation plans and identifying new and creative ways to accelerate adoption of the technology. Specifically, in the coming months, we will develop targeted implementation plans to achieve our 3 strategic pathways of enabling the market, establishing widespread consumer demand, and expanding and amplifying the portfolio of opportunities. Some of the challenges we will face are listed here, yet we will not shy away from them. Rather, we will seek to turn them into the very opportunities and benefits that California needs, creating a cost-competitive, renewably sourced transformation of both our transportation and energy systems. Our mission is to accelerate the commercialization of hydrogen and fuel cell vehicles to achieve the aggressive economic, social, and environmental goals of California. We will build an environment in which private investment and customer demand leads to a self-sustaining market and defines a clear off-ramp for government. Our objective is 1,000 stations by 2030, but our goal is the value proposition to customers that creates this self-sustaining market. Self-sustaining is when the majority of customers are buying the cars without incentives because the costs of the vehicle and fuel makes economic sense, and the cars, trucks, vans, and SUVs meet 100% of their needs. Government is no longer leading the infrastructure funding, and all Californians are reaping the benefits. Quite simply, we will attract the everyday customer when the value proposition for fuel cell vehicles and hydrogen is the same or better than the traditional option. The revolution will occur when we can make the market transformation to renewable fuel cell vehicles and infrastructure tangible and accessible to all Californians. We have begun the journey to the world we envision, and I invite you to join us in this revolution and the conversations and decisions as they're being made. Together, we can create a new transportation and energy future for the benefits of all. I want to thank you for your time together and hand it back over to Ben.
Thanks, Bill. So before we get started with the Q&A, just a quick reminder that if you have any questions, please use the GoToWebinar questions feature. Also, the presentation and the recording will be available next week. A link will be sent out to all registrants to the webinar. So with that, Bill, the first question, can you confirm how many fuel cell vehicles are in California versus how many fuel cell vehicles are in use worldwide?
Oh, I do not have the worldwide numbers offhand, but there are just under 5,000 now. The last I looked a few months ago, I think the world numbers were a couple thousand at most total, and I believe we might have that somewhere on our website.
Yes, and I'll add to that, On our website, cascp.org/by-the-numbers, we have a list of a couple of different numbers, but including vehicle numbers in California, or nationally, and we're also working on getting numbers worldwide as well. And so once it's posted, it will be at that site there. Our second question, the CEC, sorry, as questions are coming in, the questions are jumping. The CEC investment plan for ARVTP states that hydrogen has far greater potential to replace gasoline and to reduce greenhouse gases than BEVs. Does CFTP have any plans or thoughts on using this information to promote hydrogen vehicles and overcome anti-hydrogen opinion?
I'm glad you found that. That's a great recognition, and it really reinforces what we know, which is the state and the different agencies strongly support both ZEB platforms. And the challenge we have really is that the hydrogen and fuel cell vehicles are just coming onto the market now. The battery side has had a decade head start. So overcoming really the basic awareness and education need is part of our everyday lives. And the fact that the information from the state shows that hydrogen and fuel cells have a greater potential will do a great deal of support for that conversation. So we're looking forward to having our future conversations because of that new investment plan and the data behind the state.
Next question, is there a CSP document that summarizes this plan?
Well, we do have now on the website the plan itself. We do not have a shorter version, but one thing we will work on are some different slide decks or summary pages so that people can understand this in different ways. One of the ideas is to create small, I'll call them one-pagers for different market audiences. There's a lot in this report. It is quite a bit to unpack and digest. And the idea is we will do that specific to different audiences. And that way they can be tailored to what they want and need.
Next question. Could you also touch on status for heavy truck conversion to FCV, like the Anheuser/Nikola trucks?
We don't have anything new than what's been publicly stated on Nikola and Anheuser-Busch. I think, if I'm not mistaken, we anticipate hearing a little bit more at the beginning of next year on Nikola and their plans.
What is happening to reduce the time it takes to entitle and build new stations? Currently, it takes roughly 3 to 4 years to get a station built, which is way too long.
I'm not sure it takes 3 to 4 years anymore. If you look at and I think the AB8 reports do a very good job of showing the evolution of time it takes to build a station. The first stations took many, many years. These were the first times we were building retail stations here in California, anywhere in the world. The state and the partnership and all the members have worked together on different documents such as permitting guidebooks and other pieces to help speed that up. And I think in the last AB8 report, the more recently funded stations, so those that have learned from the experience, are getting at about 1 to 2 years for a station. And I think this Thursday, the Air Resources Board has a webinar. I encourage all of you to listen and participate, and they probably can answer that in much more detail.
We had a comment come in saying that Germany currently has 300 fuel cell vehicles on the road. Thanks for that bit of information. Sorry, questions are rolling again. 1 second. All right, Bill. What is the target cadence for station rollout from 2020 to 2025 to get us to 200 stations total? Example, 25 in 25 years.
So I'll again point to ARB and some of their analysis, which is the backbone to the 1,000 stations. And as we look forward, that analysis did look at what the cadence needs to be to pick up. It takes into consideration both the target and where we are today and what needs to change over time. That's not just more stations, but bigger stations. And again, I'll defer to ARB and their report, which has that in much more detail.
Next question. What will the impact on water resources be in producing hydrogen from renewable energy?
From the current status of electrolysis, which is what you're getting towards, and actually steam methane reformation, which is more predominant in today's production of hydrogen, the actual water use in producing hydrogen is less than that of gasoline. It's close, but less. And so as improvements in the technology are made, we anticipate this will be reduced even further. I believe in one of our Well to Wheels reports, some of that analysis is spelled out for folks.
All right, next question, Bill. Do you expect increased government funding in fuel cells in the coming years?
I hope so. With where we are in the market today, we've proven that we can launch the market. We've also seen, and I think as a collection of stakeholders, that in order to get past the dreaded valley of death, we have a front load, and that's to really build up the station network now and enable it to roll. And that's going to require both public and private financing in a way that's not currently going on. So that's one of the, I think, both encouraging recognitions in this report, but also where I see stakeholders starting to point and figure out is how do we expand investment across the board.
Sorry, I'm scrolling through the questions. A lot of questions coming in. Just want to give you a heads up. So there are a lot of specific questions, and those questions we will respond to in a blog later next week to those, and also we'll respond to. We do have your contact information related to the questions, and we'll respond to those directly to you. We want to definitely keep the questions related to this particular topic. And so again, any questions that aren't responded to during this Q&A, we will respond to either in the blog or directly via email.
So Ben, I see a question there. What is the main technology to produce hydrogen at the present, and what would that change be in the future around 2030? Currently, it is steam methane reformation, and that is because the uses of hydrogen today, industrial and agricultural and other uses, that was the most cost effective, and they weren't really pressured to more renewables. Right now, for transportation, hydrogen production is actually 33% requirement renewable, which is the best in class. But we don't want to stop there. I think you're going to hear more next month around the climate summit on some goals around renewable hydrogen. There have been recent reports on where we need to go and what speed, but part of this is recognizing that there are two parallel paths to this revolution. We need to get the vehicles out there for the customers, and that way we empower the zero emission transportation, and at the same time develop the renewable pathway along the production sources. And that's starting to occur, and we're putting more attention to that to speed that up.
Bill, which other countries are trying out fuel cell vehicles, and what are their experiences with compared to California?
This is definitely a global activity. Along with California, there is Germany, Japan, Korea. Now China is getting very active in this space. California continues to be the leader in rollout of vehicles. Some other markets have pushed out stations a little faster. We're all learning and exchanging information and lessons from each other, but we're all doing it a little differently. I think the biggest thing to recognize that I note is California went fully into the retail market. We took all the training wheels off, and both the vehicles and the stations are completely retail as the existing gasoline market. Some of the other markets are a little bit more controlled and slow rollout as they develop, and that might be what's changing some of the pace of development for them.
Bill, we have a number of questions about federal support, and so relating to funding as well as participation. Can you talk about our work with DOE and
Sure. We have two very strong members in the U.S. Department of Energy and the U.S. EPA, and both of those have been original members of the partnership all along and providing just wonderful understanding, experience, and information exchange from the state to the federal level. As far as funding goes, I think California is very unique and has always had the opportunity and I'll say the privilege of putting its money where its mouth is to support environmental and other causes, much more than maybe we are willing to do on the transportation or the federal side. So we continue to be a little bit ahead, but it's okay this way because we're looking to build the model, to bring the costs down, and to make the advancements so that it's much easier for other parts of the country.
Bill, can you touch on how we work with DOE in regards to the H2 scale project?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, we did have in early versions of this document more reference to H2 at scale. We ended up pulling it because H2 at scale is an even broader look at the benefits of hydrogen and the transportation market, with just a nod to the utility and grid in our document, seemed to be too small in comparison. But we are constantly working with them to share them everything we're doing in California in this market to help them to identify where some of the key R&D needs could be met by Department of Energy and their activity. I think there's just last couple weeks ago, there were some big hydrogen at scale meetings in Chicago in the Midwest. And we're in constant communication and collaboration trying to figure out how to leverage each other's progress to push the other one forward.
Thanks, Bill. Next question. What are some promising non-vehicle applications of hydrogen fuel cell technology that we are starting to see signs of success?
This may be a little bit of a non-vehicle slash vehicle, but one of the more predominant markets right now is hydrogen forklifts. They're starting to take off in warehouse centers and facilities around the country on purely economic basis. You know, going back to DOE, they were some of the original funding support for those when they were pre-commercial, and they quickly transformed into a competitive environment. We see backup cell towers and power that way being very active and growing, not just in the US, but around the world. And I can say we have seen development, everything from mobile cell phones to stationary fuel cells for powers, including trigen systems that capitalize on renewable opportunities and providing the renewable hydrogen we need.
Thanks.
I think one more while you're looking, excuse me, is looking at microgrids and how we're looking at energy systems, not just from a distributed or a large scale, but in single homes or small sections like that. And that's something I can say we're learning and working with some of the stakeholders now to really capitalize on that.
So what are some themes and startup companies involved in the hydrogen market?
There's some themes in startup companies. I'm not sure. Interesting question. Not a new one. I think maybe. I don't know, but what comes to mind is everything from the car sharing and the new mobility changes, and how both hydrogen and batteries, but the ZEV transportation are going to play a long game with that. How will they play out in time with those? So I think as those two marry and come together, that will be interesting. I think the other will be, and it's again very early, but looking how hydrogen and electricity ironically couple together to provide these energy carriers, allow renewables to come into the system in different ways. And I think as more startups capitalize on that and play with that, we'll see some new answers and new opportunities grow there.
Bill, can you talk about stations that are being developed in other states? People want to drive outside of California.
What about other stations in other states? People want to drive. Well, I can tell you from the first vehicles, even back in the demonstration days, the first drivers were always asking to leave California and go travel like they do with every other car. We've had some stations in nearby states. I don't think any of them are now within a drive distance, or at least not a drive and a return at this moment. So that's one thing we want to encourage strongly, because as we're growing rapidly, we need to make sure our drivers can grow. And it's not going to be just Nevada, Arizona, Oregon, or Washington. It's going to start going much further than that, past the Rockies, et cetera. So that's that's something we're working with the other states. We're working with the national organizations and federal government to figure out how to make this all happen at the same time, both California, progress and success, and national with other states.
Bill, do you see any synergies between automotive and non-automotive applications, technology-wise and cost-wise?
Oh, absolutely. And in the document, we talk quite a bit of not just economies of scale, but economies of scope, because the fuel cell systems have a modularity and a common systems that the same fuel cell stack can be a small stack can power a phone, can power a car, a truck, or a building. And so a developer of that stack alone could look to put its R&D dollars divested over many applications. So the modularity of the system, and some of the same with hydrogen and the connections to the grid, will allow these systems to play off each other, lower costs, and grow different new opportunities.
I think a similar question, Bill. Would converting local delivery trucks to hydrogen help promote fuel cell vehicles near existing stations?
So I would answer that a little differently, in that could trucks and stuff, fleets, help station development? I think that's absolutely the question. Absolutely a possibility. You know, we focused here at the partnership on really the hardest nut to crack, which was the consumer market, and they're the most unpredictable of all. But we learned from watching other alternative fuels that you can be successful in a fleet application and never transfer to consumers. And so we went the other way. We're working on the consumers, and it'll be much easier to fill in fleets to both increase supply and production, as well as to load stations in early years or in markets that are growing more slowly.
And scrolling through. Got a question. What can individuals do to help further hydrogen?
I think the number one thing individuals can do is to help us with awareness and education. You know, right now everyone feels they understand batteries, even if they honestly don't know any of the details, because we carry batteries around in our pockets and our phones. And hydrogen and fuel cells, while they've been around nearly as long, are a little bit more like a mythical unicorn that people don't understand from 7th grade science class. So I think merely talking about it and asking questions is a baseline that everybody can do. And then I think as you talk to stakeholders from policy developers and local officials to retail station operators, but asking about what are they doing, what are they looking for, and have they considered these options, so that there's more awareness and more opportunity growing within the base.
Next question. Are there organizations similar to the Fuel Cell Partnership supporting the rollout of stations and cars on the East Coast of the U.S.?
There's a group called H2USA, which is focused primarily, they're a national organization, but primarily focused right now on the Northeast. They're supporting Toyota and Air Liquide, but all the market providers in establishing the very first stations, with a dozen under development. And once those start to come online, then vehicles can start going out to those communities. So H2USA, along with Department of Energy and many other players and stakeholders, are helping that activity.
Next question, Bill. Is there any plans to convert existing stations using gaseous hydrogen storage to liquid hydrogen storage to increase storage capacity and reduce the delivery and supply issues?
I don't know about any specific plans with any specific stations, but conceptually, you could, depending on the specific station setup, the storage, be it gaseous or liquid, could be uncoupled and replaced with a different storage mechanism. You know, some of the gaseous are a little bit more systematic and may require a little time, money, and effort, but there wouldn't be anything prohibiting that except for that, really, the resources.
Thanks, Bill. Bill, what job opportunities can you think of within the hydrogen world for people who do not have a PhD?
Oh, well, I don't think it's limited by any means to having a PhD. Sure, those are the ones that are exciting and sound the most glamorous. but if I point at just a couple of things happening at a couple educational institutions, and that's Cal State LA, Rio Hondo, and several other universities are developing everything from mechanic programs to fuel cell to going and getting the PhD degrees that go with it. And I think that's something we're seeing develop and mature as the market is starting to be more universally understood and aware and growing. The desire to figure out the different ways to participate in that are growing. So the educational institutions are finding coursework and programs focused on that. We're seeing not PhD, but I'll say a lot of engineering professionals in the infrastructure development, and we're seeing infrastructure companies going that way. We're also seeing a great deal of activity in the marketing area as well. So I think if you think about it in the most simplest of terms, we're building a new market, and that new market is going to be supported by everything from the technical to the social to the marketing and everything in between. So there are plenty of opportunities, and we're still uncovering them as we go.
Thanks, Bill. There's a question about bottleneck, and I'm not sure if I completely understand this question. So the question is, hydrogen generation, would that be the bottleneck?
Okay, let's see. That could be a bottleneck. Right now, one of the things we're recognizing is, and I spoke a little bit about that earlier, is we need a dedicated hydrogen supply for transportation. We're currently using essentially the extra capacity in the hydrogen industrial system for other applications, and so that limits, some of where we are, where we can grow. We're going to go through growing pains both today and in the coming years as that production gains momentum and builds to be dedicated to this. So I think production is one of the things that we may see growing pains right now, but more importantly, we need to grow great deals or build great deals of new production, renewable production, to meet the demand ahead.
Quick question real quickly, and Bill answers this one. The question is, what is the best way to stay informed about developing news? And so if you go onto our website, csp.org, you can sign up for our newsletter on a weekly basis. We typically send out information about news relating to hydrogen and fuel cell technology. Also, as we host events like this, we will send out e-blasts to alert you of the information.
And follow us on Facebook.
Oh, yes, and follow us on social media. We have Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn that provides plenty of information. And also, you're also welcome to shoot us an email or give us a call. Bill, who are the main fuel cell producers in California? Which type of fuel cells are produced today?
There's a number of fuel cell stack producers. For vehicles, most of them are being done by the vehicle manufacturers, but there are producers such as Ballard in Canada, I think Altergy here in California, not in the automotive market that I'm aware of, but there are others out in Connecticut and other areas. That's going to be an interesting piece. I guess this might get back to the PhD and future jobs opportunities. But stack production, both from a development side to a manufacturing side, is going to be a big opportunity as we see these grow in potential.
All right, Bill, our last question here. Isn't hydrogen less efficient than pure electric? And what is the advantage of hydrogen fuel cell vehicles compared to battery vehicles?
It's interesting because that can be answered either way. Hydrogen, when you convert, say, electricity to hydrogen and then back to electricity, is not going to be as efficient as in a battery vehicle, for example. However, with surplus renewable energy, that no longer is a concern. But the challenge you have is, while in that point, a battery vehicle may be more efficient, it also has limitations on range, on charge time, etc. And so the great advantage of hydrogen is that it can store much more energy in much less space And therefore, that's the big difference in range of these vehicles, not to mention a fill time that's similar to gasoline vehicles. So it's rather difficult. We can get into a long-winded explanation of why some of those differences are there. But if you look at the entire value change and what you're trying to achieve, depending on your application, hydrogen will be much more effective than other fuel opportunities.
Thank you, Bill. So again, thank you everyone for joining us for our webinar today. Again, the presentation and the recording will be available next week. We'll send out an email with a link to where that's located on our website. Also, I wanted to note on Thursday, we will be hosting an ABA webinar with Dr. Andrew Martinez from the California Air Resources Board. Please visit our website at cascp.org/events to register for that webinar as well. If you have any comments or questions later on, feel free to email us using the info@csp.org email address as well. Again, thank you and have a great day.